Okay, very quickly I want to cover what the difference between experimental and theoretical data is, or this could also be experimental versus theoretical equations, or different things like that. So first of all, theoretical, that's kind of what should happen. If you're in class for this day, we did an activity with pennies, where we took a bunch of pennies, about 50 of them, and then we dumped them all out of a cup, and all the ones that were tails we removed, and all the ones that were heads we kept. And then we took the ones that were heads, put them back in the cup, shook up the cup, dumped it out again, and repeated the process. We're removing all the ones that were tails, keeping all the ones that were heads. So theoretically, we would expect what happens to follow this first equation right here. Y equals 50 times 1/2 to the x. The reason is, if we started with 50, that should be the number here. This number should always be what you start with in an exponential equation. The reason for that is if you plug in 0 for x, watch what happens. You get y equals 50 times 1/2 to the x, which we're plugging in 0 for, and anything to the 0 power is 1. So we just end up with 50. That number then represents how much we start with at time 0, or after 0 times that we've dumped the pennies out in this case, or whatever. So that's what we'd expect it to be. In an ideal world, that's how it would work. Now the 1/2 represents the fact that when you flip a penny over, you've got a 50-50 shot of rolling tails, or landing on tails. So in this case, there's a 1/2 probability that we're going to get a tails, and that's why we expect that to be 1/2. Okay, so that would be the theoretical. That's what should happen. Experimental is what actually happened. Now, pennies over the long run are always going to give you 50%. It is always going to be 50% tails, 50% head in the long run. But only flipping 50 of them, you're not exactly going to get 25 and 25 every time. It could be a lot different. So this was an example of something somebody actually got in class when we did this, when we did an exponential regression. Okay, so they got 0.43. So overall, they only got tails about 43% of the time instead of 50% of the time, which would be 1/2. And that's fine. That's just how things really work, and that's how it happened. Also, even though they started with 50 pennies, the equation said they started with 55. And that's probably to compensate for the fact that they're not removing as many tails as you would expect. But the point is, when you actually run an experiment, you don't always get exactly what you should expect. In general, you would think it'd be close. I mean, 50 and 55 are reasonably close, and 0.5 and 0.43 aren't that far off. But it's important to note that theoretical is what should happen, what we expect to happen, and then the experimental is what actually happens, and those two things are not always the same.